Welcome to Backswath's Eagle Software Program Tutorial Series, tutorial number 5. This tutorial will show you how to categorize expenses and deal with unique entries. You will need to be logged into the Eagle program to proceed with this tutorial. If you aren't logged in, please do so now. If you need assistance with logging in, please refer to the tutorial on logging in or contact support@backswath.com. How to categorize expenses into production, operating, admin and overhead, and other revenue expense sections. Some accountant-prepared financial statements are broken down into these categories, but many are not. Many statements simply include revenue and expense items. In order for Eagle to correctly calculate gross margin, contribution margin, and net operating profit margin, you must carefully categorize your expenses while entering them into Eagle. It is also important if you are working with Eagle in a benchmarking group so that all the data is treated as close to the same way as possible, which will strengthen the benchmark. Production expenses. This is where you put the expenses that are direct inputs into your final product. For crop producers, this section is for expenses such as seed, chemical, fertilizer, etc. For livestock operations, this section is for feed, mineral supplements, etc. There are a few other expenses that are not direct inputs, but should be placed in this section. Crop insurance goes in this section because it is practically a must-have in the crop production process. Veterinary bills and related expenses for livestock operations go into this section for that same reason. If your accountant has made year-end accrual adjustments and you know that they are for production expenses, you should place them here. Remember that anything entered in this section is treated as an expense, so if there is a net positive accrual adjustment, you should enter it as a negative in this section. Operating expenses. This is where you put the expenses that are tied to the operating cycle, but not direct inputs into the final product. For example, fuel, operating wages, freight, repairs and maintenance, etc. Admin and overhead expenses. This section is where you put fixed expenses such as office expenses, rent, amortization, management wages, utilities, bank charges, interest, etc. This section tends to have lots of entries. Remember, if you don't find the specific code that you are looking for, select Other and add a note. Note that this section should not be used as an other category where you dump unknown or non-farming related expenses. If you have expenses or revenues that are not tied to your operation, please enter them in the Other Revenue and Expenses section. How to deal with certain unique entries. Some entries in Eagle can cause confusion. We will review some of the more common entries that cause confusion. Note, if you would like advice on how to treat a certain item, you can contact your Backswath consultant if you are working with one. Another way to get support is if you have purchased a support package that includes management support. If so, contact Backswath directly. Not knowing how to enter taxes. Taxes are entered in a separate section towards the bottom of the income statement. On the income statement page, enter the amount of current and/or future income taxes, and then click Save. Not knowing if an income item is supposed to be placed in the revenue section or the Other Revenue Expense section. If the revenue item is related to your core business operation, for example, corn sales if you are a crop producer, then place it in the revenue section. However, say you make some money on the side by selling small amounts of harvested firewood, or renting out a house on some land you own. This is not core farming revenue, and therefore it should be entered in the Other Revenue Expense section. Not knowing if an asset is a current or long-term asset. Once in the balance sheet section, an asset is a current asset if it is expected to be liquidated, for example, converted into cash within 1 year. Not knowing if a liability is a current or long-term liability. A liability is a current liability if it is expected to be repaid within 1 year. Not knowing how or where to enter capital assets. Note, these are called property, plant, and equipment in Eagle. You must enter information in both description and detail for capital assets in order for Eagle to apply the correct amortization rates. For example, in the forecasting and scenario analysis within Eagle, both of which will be discussed in later tutorials. When entering the value of buildings on your farm, select Property, Plant, and Equipment for the description and then select Buildings for the detail. Go to the Balance Sheet tab and go into your long-term assets. In the description, we'll pick Property, Plant, and Equipment. And in the detail, we'll pick Building and enter the amount. Remember to not use dollar signs, commas, or periods. And then click Save and Close. In Eagle, land is entered at cost. The entry for land is found in Property, Plant, and Equipment in the Long-Term Assets section. So we pick Property, Plant, and Equipment and click Land and enter your amount and click Save and Close. Not knowing how to enter demand loans. Note, when preparing financial statements, accountants are bound by regulations to place the full amount of demand loans in current liabilities. Often these demand loans are refinanced and not paid off within 1 year. In order to get an accurate picture of your true current liabilities in Eagle, you should consider the likelihood of these loans being paid off within 1 year. For example, if you are likely to refinance, enter the current portion of the demand loan in the current liability section, then enter the remaining balance in long-term liabilities. Not knowing how to enter personal drawings. If you are withdrawing money or goods such as fuel, house, rent, office supplies, etc. from your operation over and above management salaries, this should be entered as dividends in the admin and overhead expense section. Click Create in the Admin and Overhead section, then click Dividends and Personal Drawings and Dividends from the second drop-down menu. Enter in your amount and then in the comment write what that amount was for and click Save and Close. Not knowing how to enter revenue or losses due to inventory price changes. Since inventory price changes are the result of changes in market prices, it does not make sense to include it in core revenue. Enter these gains or losses in the Other Revenue Expense section. Click Add in the Other Revenue Expense section. Then select Inventory Price Change from the description. And in the detail, pick one of the listed, and then in the amount, enter your amount and click Save and Close. Not knowing how to differentiate and enter management salaries and operating wages. Management salaries should be entered in the Administration and Overhead section because they are not tied to operations. Click Create in the Admin and Overhead section, then select Management Salaries. Enter an amount, then click Save and Close. Enter operating wages in the Operating Expenses section. In the description, select Operating Wages and then enter the amount. Then click Save and Close. Congratulations, you have learned how to categorize expenses and also how to deal with several unique entries. This concludes the basic tutorial section of the series.